you listen to reason? Will you open your eyes and to wonder what you'll find with an open mind? You may be surprised. Yeah, gotta get away from this illusion for the sake of the world. This delusion, it's gotta go. Yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience Live. It is Sunday, June 8th, 2014. I'm Matt Dillahunty. This is John Iacletti.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Cool. Nice shirt.
Thanks.
That's awesome. This is a live public access television program out of Austin, Texas. We'll have the telephone number up at the bottom of the screen so you can call in and have a conversation. We like to engage with primarily believers. We'll try to keep lines open for believers of different religious traditions, but we'll take calls from atheists as well, talk about what you believe and why, or maybe you can ask questions. Maybe we'll have answers, maybe we won't. I don't know. And then after the show's over, we get together for dinner at El Arroyo, and they'll put the address up at the bottom of the screen as well. That's actually all I have.
Okay.
I mean, the announcements just keep getting shorter and shorter. So what do you have for us today?
Well, I'm wearing my Matt shirt in honor of your performance in Memphis the other night. I hesitate to call it a debate.
Me too.
But I thought, after watching it and kind of going through what was said, I thought I would come on the show and bring my top 10 list of things I learned at the Psi 10 Bruggencate debate.
All right.
So, number 10, everyone knows that God exists. Number 9, it requires God to doubt the existence of God. Number 8, I don't do Bible studies with non-believers. Number 7, Adam and Eve did die that day. They died spiritually. Number 6, stealing is wrong because God is not a thief. Number 5, I don't do Bible verses, bro. Number 4, the Quran says the Bible is true, therefore the Quran is false.
There's actually an extra step, but go ahead.
Yeah, I know, but I'm mocking Psi, so I'm boiling it down. Number 3, God will not be mocked. Number 2, God loves you, so he's sending you to hell. And the number 1 thing I learned at the Psi 10 Bruggencate debate, brain in a vat, brain in a vat, brain in a vat.
Yeah, that was a weird, I had that weird weekend at the Church of Christ in San Antonio. But the debate that I did in Memphis with Psi, which by the way is up, and I haven't checked it in a couple days, but it had like 50,000 views in the first 30 hours or something. So that was really good, and I'm glad some people enjoyed it. Obviously, I'll probably be addressing a couple mistakes I made, one glaring error, some missed opportunities, some opportunities to kind of give better answers or things like that. I'm doing a podcast tonight, so I imagine we'll probably talk about it then. And there's evidently some callers that might raise the questions today. But the debate part itself, even though I'm reluctant to actually, it was a debate, but presuppositionalists don't tend to debate. They just make claims, and when you try to point out that that's ultimately a circular claim, that they're appealing to God because God, they want to claim that it's vicious or virtuously circular, as if that's actually a thing. It's not a vicious circle. But overall, though, I enjoyed the time that we were up on the stage actually talking. I think it was far from perfect and everything, but it was the stuff leading up to the debate and what happened after the debate that I didn't like. And, even during the debate. So Sarah Moorhead had tried to arrange this debate previously with me against Psi and Eric Hovind together, like a 2-on-1, and it didn't happen. And she had evidently talked to Eric's rep and thought that she was talking to a rep for both of them. And so there was confusion. And when we arranged this one, I put her in charge of setting it up because I was tired of doing the runaround. And so Sarah worked American Atheist Atheist of the Year, Sarah Moorhead, worked her tail off to get this thing together, and we had all kinds of problems even getting the contract signed. And then twice during the debate, Cy chastised her from the stage. I mean, who does that in a debate? Call out the person who arranged to give you a podium on which to speak,
and then things were going on behind the scenes that you didn't know about, and
then you bitch at them from the stage. I mean, that's classy right there. But it got worse at the end because once the debate was over, they wanted to take some pictures, and so Cy, who called me a liar on stage, is happy to stand next to me and take pictures. But when they wanted to get me and Cy with Sarah, who organized the whole thing, he refused to do a picture with her because she's a liar. And so somebody called him an asshole for it, and it just turned into I'm never going to interact with him again. May end up debating some other precept at some point because I don't know what case people are going to present. I might agree to a debate and they turn out to be a presuppositionalist, but there's no real reason to engage with presuppositionalist apologetics in the future, which was kind of my point in closing. It was a good weekend, though, all other things considered.
Yeah.
You want to go ahead and take some calls?
Yeah, let's go to calls.
All right, we've got Kyle. Whoops. Kyle in Georgetown, you're here.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. How you doing?
Pretty good. I'm a big, long-time fan of the show. But I called in a few weeks ago, and I wasn't able to really kind of say what I wanted to say. I'm not used to talking on, with people on television with lots of people listening, and
nobody's listening.
And I'm also kind of scared, that I'm gonna say the wrong thing, get hung up on, and everything. But I think I can say what I wanted to say kind of quickly.
Okay.
In the discussion we had, we came down to talking about the issue of certainty and do you believe this or that, and do you believe in God, et cetera. And I used the example of a court case, and I think what you said was, well, if you don't vote to convict because there's a reasonable doubt, then that means that you don't believe it, were your words. And I think that two things I'd like to say about that. One is that it's definitely false, that you're dead wrong on that one.
Well, I don't even know what it is that you're saying that I said, so I can't really say whether I was dead wrong or not.
You said that if you don't vote to convict somebody because there is a reasonable doubt, then that means that you did not believe that they were guilty. That's what you said.
Yeah, you weren't sufficiently convinced of their guilt to say they were guilty. Yes, that's true. It's a tautology.
So I definitely believe that that's wrong.
Well, how's it wrong?
How's it wrong is I think that, at the most level that a lot of people have seen, a lot of times you'll get jurors and they'll come out and they say, no, we thought he was guilty, but for such and such reason. I mean, because there's a reasonable doubt doesn't mean that you don't, think that it's the case. And I mean, you may have indirect evidence about something or an overwhelming
we're talking about a conclusion. If you are actually convinced of the defendant's guilt, and we're going to set aside legal technicalities for this, I mean, This is just an analogy, but if you are actually convinced of the defendant's guilt, then you vote guilty. And if you're not convinced of the defendant's guilt, then you vote not guilty.
Well, I think that the standard is a reasonable doubt, legally. Is there a reasonable doubt?
Yes.
And I think that, and I think
first of all, there are different standards for different claims. There's reasonable doubt, there's preponderance of the evidence, et cetera, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
The thing is, if you believe that the defendant is guilty, under whatever standard of evidence you're talking about, then you vote guilty.
No. For instance, I can give you an example. Okay. For instance, if you have an overwhelming feeling when you meet a person that that you find them to be a scary person, possibly violent, say say you have a child and this is going to be somebody who your child's going to be around or something, and as soon as you meet them, you think this person is scary. Now you can't on that you can't say that you're certain that they've done anything.
Who mentioned anything about certainty? Certainty is completely irrelevant.
Okay, absolutely. All right, well then let's go back to reasonable doubt.
I don't care. I don't care how you define the standard. But basically, what you're starting with is, hey, I've got a feeling about somebody. Well, how's that relevant?
That's what I started with.
How's that relevant to the point that I was making?
It's relevant because of human decision making and how it works. and we're talking about.
No. You could have irrational people on the jury. I'm talking about what they are actually convinced of. If you are in fact convinced that the defendant did it, then you are convinced they are guilty.
Based on the evidence, not based
But
on
there
your
still
feeling.
may be a reasonable doubt. Well, let me give you one more thing. Okay.
If the standard is you are convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, then there's no longer a reasonable doubt.
Well, I think that if you were to take a list of questions and ask people, do you believe this? Do you believe it? Do you believe this is true? Do you feel confident that this is true? And then you were to, ask 100 questions and then go down that list and then ask people, is there a reasonable doubt about this one? Is there a reasonable doubt about this one? They're not going to line up perfectly.
You are focused on exactly the wrong thing, because now you've moved on to people's professions of what they believe versus what they actually believe. The courtroom analogy is an analogy. We can sit here and come up with all sorts of exceptions that are completely irrelevant. I don't know what your point is that you're getting at. Because my position is that if you either believe or you do not believe. And you can be belief is the result of becoming convinced, and you can be convinced based on good reasons or bad reasons. But when you believe something, that means that you are convinced that this is likely true.
But it doesn't mean that you have no doubts.
Nobody said no doubts. As a matter of fact, I tossed out absolute certainty pretty much every time we've talked about this.
I think it doesn't mean that you don't have a reasonable doubt.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, Kyle, how you go about defining reasonable doubt.
Okay.
That's completely irrelevant.
Okay, well, let me just say about that. Like I said, I had two things I wanted to say about it.
Okay.
But my final statement about the reasonable doubt issue is, I think that most of the audience would probably agree that a lot of times when people don't convict, that they do believe that the person was guilty, but that they've been instructed by the court that if there's a reasonable doubt, they
Holy
can convict.
crap, Kyle! I just said let's set aside the legal exceptions and stuff. It's an analogy. It's not actually the same. You do know what an analogy means, right?
I understand what analogy means.
So why are you pointing out that in some court cases, somebody might actually be convinced that the defendant actually did it, but they're forced to vote not guilty based on the rules of the courtroom? That is utterly irrelevant to the point that I was making.
The reason I said it is to demonstrate to you that for most people, to say that they believe something does not eliminate the possibility that there might be a reasonable doubt. So
No, it doesn't, Kyle. Here's the thing. I'm talking about whether or not somebody believes something, and you're talking about how they act based upon that belief. Yes, you are, because they...
No, I'm not.
Kyle, you just said that there are people who are convinced that the defendant is guilty, but they vote not guilty. What you're saying is that they are convinced that the individual is guilty. They believe it, but they're going to act in an opposite way. Those are two different things. You can believe some... You're wrong.
I disagree.
You're wrong.
I disagree. Okay, well, then let me move on to my second statement.
No, call back.
I don't even really agree with this premise. I think if you're a juror and you're convinced a person's guilty, then you don't have a reasonable doubt. If it's based on the evidence that's presented in the case,
and if
it's based on a feeling you get when you meet them, that's I don't see how you could say you're convinced by that.
It could be any number of reasons, but there's a difference between I am convinced of this and this is the action I'm going to take on behalf of it. And he's tied up with this, well, people might be convinced that the defendant's actually guilty, but they'll vote not guilty. Yeah, those are two different things. I can be convinced that, that OJ did it and still let him off with a technicality. Or I could just say, you know what? Prosecutors go for jury nullification all the time. Yeah, we all know he did it, but let's let him go anyway. Somebody murders the individual who killed his daughter. And you get up there and everybody on the jury is convinced that this guy actually did it. And yet their action that they take may be to vote not guilty in order to let him off. That's why they're two different things. But I'm talking about the courtroom analogy is just about what people actually believe, which is separate. It's about following the evidence to a conclusion, or even crappy evidence or bad arguments to a conclusion.
Yeah.
All right, Zach in West Jefferson, North Carolina, how are you?
I'm good. Are you?
We're all right.
All right. Well, before I kind of get into what I want to talk about, I just kind of had an opening question for you.
Okay, go.
All right. Well, if you realize that how as technology advanced, so did our scientific researches and stuff we found out about the universe and Earth, correct?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding what you're saying.
Like, you agree that as technology advanced, so did our scientific researches and facts we've got.
Can we turn that down a little bit? It's kind of buzzing in it. So I'm agreeing that as technology advanced, what?
As technology advanced, so has our scientific researches and the things we discover.
Yeah, although I'm not sure that there's a causality there. Maybe the research advances the technology, and then the technology advances the research. So yeah.
Yeah, you agree with that. Okay. So would you find it more or less, like, how I say, impressive, I guess, if someone with none of the technology we have came up with conclusions before we ever did?
Well, what do you mean came up with conclusions before we ever did?
Like, say, the water cycle or something. If someone had already said the water cycle exists, and they didn't have the technology we did to be able to determine that,
Well,
and they ended up being right,
if they accurately described the water cycle in such a way that it led to the discovery, it would certainly be interesting. But people can have suspicions about how things work all the time. We can make all kinds of inferences, but the point at which we would be justified in accepting an explanation of the water cycle is when somebody actually provides the evidence in support of it. Because people can be right for all sorts of reasons. You can't. Like, for example, if somebody 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, whatever, noticed that the water level declined and then it rained and the water level filled back up, and intuited or inferred something that later on, when we discover the water cycle, we go back and say, oh, this could be reworded or reinterpreted to fit that. I don't find that impressive at all.
Okay, well, I get what your point is. And the water cycle, like I said, was just an example of what I was talking about.
Sure.
But really, like, what I actually called in one of my favorite verses to go by, where it's like, showing that kind of relationship,
Okay.
it is in Hebrews 11:3.
Okay.
And you want me to quote that for you?
Sure.
All right, it says, through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, and so that things which are seen were made of not things that are seen or appear.
What's impressive about that?
It's saying more or less that it's kind of a verse I interpret as talking about atoms and things like.
How do you know it's talking about atoms?
Basically, because it's saying that things we see, such as human beings or a wall or something, is made of things we do not see.
But what on earth makes you think? So here's the thing. Somebody wrote this, and what you're trying to claim is that in their head they had a concept of atoms.
Yes, sir.
What's the justification for claiming that this is what their concept actually was, atoms?
Well, can you come up with a separate interpretation of what they could have been talking about?
First of all, that's an argument from ignorance fallacy. You're assuming that you're right because you haven't been demonstrated to be wrong. I'm asking you to demonstrate.
I ain't stating I'm right. I'm giving an example and seeing what you provide to oppose to that theory if I have.
I'm asking you to demonstrate the truth of your claim that this is in fact what was in the person's head.
I think personally it is what's in the person's head because
Okay, why?
the way he describes the fact, like
He describes that things are made of things that were not visible. How is that atoms?
how is it? Okay, well the scientific, what is the? You got the definition of atoms, of what they are by scientifically stating?
I'm asking how you came to the conclusion that this person is talking about atoms and why you think that.
Well, that's kind of like goes back to my 6th grade year in school whenever they told me about what atoms were and everything, and I came across this verse one day, and I did some research on like scholars' websites like gotquestions.org for Christianity, that kind of stuff. And later on, I have come to my own conclusion that if he's talking about a material such as, let's say, a bed frame, and he's saying it's made out of things that you can't see,
Okay.
the only thing I can determine is that it's made out of atoms, because they say everything's made out of atoms, and atoms cannot be visibly seen with the naked eye. And back then, they weren't interpreting. We could look to a telescope or anything, because that didn't exist back then.
Yeah.
So I get the idea that they are talking about some either atoms or related to atoms. I just can't think of anything else that something's made out of that can't be seen with our eyes.
So when we get around to, let's say we confirm string theory, will people be justified in reinterpreting that verse to
I'm
think,
sorry,
say
could
it's
you,
talking about
repeat your
string?
statement?
Yeah, if we get around to the point where we have confirmed string theory and that everything is made of strings, will people then be justified in saying that what was in this person's head was strings?
No, sir.
So it's only atoms, it's nothing beyond that.
That's exactly that's my thoughts on it, because, you see, you're giving an example that will probably never be in a real thing.
How did you determine
you're
that?
using that. No,
How did
go
you
ahead.
determine that string theory is never going to be confirmed?
That's probably because science has already confirmed that things are made of atoms, and I'll go by that. Like I said, I do not oppose
Yes.
science.
Zach, what are atoms made of?
Sir, you're being listen to what I'm saying, okay?
What? Well, I'm being what?
Yeah, I said you're being rude to me right now. I'm trying to say something, and you're asking me all these different questions.
I'm
Let me finish.
asking you questions for a reason, Zach. It's
Yes,
because
I know that.
y-
And what I'm saying is,
and-
let me answer
and-
the first one before you
and-
go to the second.
And what is the what? What'd you say?
Let me answer the first one before you go to the second, because I wasn't finished.
Well, first of all, it's our show, so you get as much time as we say. But what weren't you finished with?
I wasn't finished explaining why I didn't believe there'd be a string theory and how it come to the determination that there won't be.
Oh, okay, cool. Do you have any expertise in this area?
Pardon me now?
Do you have any expertise in the area of string theory?
No, I do not.
Then why do we care why you're convinced it won't be true?
Well, you asked me, so
I did ask you.
why do you care?
You made a claim, and I'm wondering what led you to that claim.
Yeah, but you just said, what makes you think we care when you just asked, so obviously that made me think you cared.
Oh, I don't care why you think string. I want to know so
Then
that
don't
I
ask
can
me that.
expose
Ask me
the
relevant
problem.
questions, what you care about.
Well, excuse me?
Ask me relevant questions that you care about. If you don't care about something, don't ask me.
I'm asking you a question to expose your ignorance and your fallacy in this point. It's
You
not
can go
that
ahead and call me ignorant, but you need to state your question.
You just said, did you not, that you're not an expert in string theory, right?
Yes, sir.
Which means you are in fact ignorant about string theory.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so why are you objecting when I point this out?
I'm going by my own opinion, saying I don't believe that'll be a real thing. Everybody has their opinions, correct?
Okay, so in your opinion, string theory will never be proved, and in your opinion, this verse
No,
refers.
I ain't saying it won't be proved.
Zach?
I'm saying, in my opinion, I don't think it's going to, come into concept to what I'm thinking of the Bible's talking about atoms. I don't think it's going to replace that. I don't think it'll be justified by that.
Zach?
Because that's my opinion.
Zach, so it's your opinion that string theory is never going to be confirmed, and it's your opinion that this verse is about atoms, and it's also your opinion that this verse is about atoms, and therefore the only explanation for the supposed truth of this verse is that God revealed it to somebody, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Why should anybody pay attention to your opinion? What is the evidence that backs this up?
I think it all actually determines down to not evidence, but rather opinion-wise. I'm not stating it, saying it's true.
I'm not interested in opinions that are without evidential support. I'm not interested in
okay, go ahead.
and I'm not interested in opinions that have nothing to do with the evidence or sound arguments.
Okay, well, you want me to give you a different example then, so we can better understand?
No,
it?
why would I want you to give me a different example when you haven't done anything?
I just said I was ignorant in that
Zach?
state, and we can't really have a talk about it if I don't know about it.
Well, then why did you start talking about? Are you an expert on atoms?
Well, if you listen, I have
Zach?
5 different verses.
Zach, are you an expert
Yes,
on
sir.
atoms?
No.
Are you an expert? Are you an expert on textual criticism?
Pardon me?
Are you an expert on textual criticism?
Criticism? No, sir. I actually just no.
Are you in any way an expert on what the original author of Hebrews meant in their head?
I'm actually have interpretations of that. I don't.
Are
Really,
you? Do you have anything to
I'm
back
not
this up beyond
yeah, what?
opinion?
I'm sorry. Just go ahead.
Do you have anything to back that up beyond just this is your opinion?
Well, besides this, that's the opinion of many scholars that study the Bible and Hebrew, and you can go online and look any of that up. There's a lot of scholars that study the Bible and Hebrew, the original
Yes. So
text and everything.
So
and they
Zach,
say that.
let me.
That's where I get my information.
Zach, okay, fine. Let me ask you this. Here's this verse in Hebrews 11:3,
Yes, sir.
where it has been translated as the things of this world are made up of things that are not visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. When did we confirm that the things of this world were made of things that aren't visible to the naked eye?
I know. Well, see, that's a hard question for me because, like I said, I'm not an expert.
Oh,
Once
okay.
it's discovered,
But would you at least agree that let's just guess at maybe 1,000 years or so between the time this verse was written and the time that we discovered that matter was made up of things that we can't physically see.
Okay.
Yeah. What led us to that conclusion? Was it this verse, or was it investigation
I
on
really
Earth?
doubt if it's a verse,
Yeah.
particularly. I think it was more or less a scientific and technology
So
advance.
is it more likely that the author of this verse actually had a concept of atoms in their head and failed to relay this concept in any way that would be useful or beneficial? Or is it more likely that after we discovered atoms, some believer went through and said, hey, here's a verse, and I could probably make this look like it was talking about atoms?
I think, well, you want my opinion on what you're stating?
Well, I asked which one of those seemed more likely to you.
To me, I think it's more likely that some guy had gotten experience or has been led to believe through God that that's what it was. I don't think that God gives specific names because we name the things like atoms and
Sure.
stuff.
It would have been silly to put the name of the thing in there.
And he couldn't have done that.
Why-
So I think
why
through
is it-
God, he was,
Why is
Go
it
ahead.
then, Zach, that this description doesn't have anything about it, any of the properties of an atom, other than that you can't see it with the naked eye? How do we know this doesn't? How do we know that this doesn't refer to everything in matter is made up of tiny little invisible angels?
well, that's because they knew what angels was in the Bible, and I'm pretty sure that if he was stating it was angels, he would have said angels instead of just giving the name entirely and just saying it's the thing that you can't see that's in things.
What I'm asking is, why is there no useful description of an atom? There's nothing here that is
Useful description. So saying it's like saying that, get an interpretation of something rubber and round that bounces. You just assume a bouncy ball, correct?
Would I
description of one, correct?
a rubber and round that bounces?
A piece of rubber that is circular and bounces.
Circular
assume a
or
rubber
spherical?
basketball.
Anyway,
Based on the description, though, right?
I would assume that it was something that matches the description, but I'm not going to claim that you
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not going
Well,
to. Zach, I'm not going to claim that you are actually thinking of a red bouncy ball.
But you would get the idea in your head, I'm saying. I'm kind of going on about how I feel about why.
If you said to me that you have something that's invisible, which is the only property that's listed in this verse, would I assume atoms?
It's not the only thing, because
Sure
it
it
also
is.
states that it makes everything. So those two really good demonstrations or examples of what it might be.
It doesn't say everything. It says that.
Indeed, by our faith, our ancestors received approval. By faith, we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, which you haven't demonstrated, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. And here's
Exactly,
here's
and what is seen.
What?
What is seen, meaning
Yes.
objects around us.
I understand that, Zach. I'm getting ready to blow your mind here. You ready?
I'm ready.
Go read Romans 1,
Yes, sir. Just give me one second
where
here.
where it says that we're without excuse because the visible things, the visible attributes, you can get the verse, but it's made up of the invisible things of God's nature. Now, how do you know that 11:3 in
Hey,
Hebrews
sir.
isn't referring to God because God is not visible?
Can you do me a favor? Can you said Romans 1 what?
I don't remember the exact verse, but I think it's verse.
If you can't give me the verse, then how am I supposed to look it up?
Well, can you not find Romans 1? But anyway,
I'm on Romans 1,
okay.
but I'm trying to save time here and find what you're talking about. I see it.
I think it's 1 to
The
9.
invisible things of him in the creation of the world clearly seen.
Yeah.
So, can you clearly see atoms nowadays?
Excuse me?
There's two different things between what he's stating there, because the Bible was written back then. So it's kind
The
of
Bible was written back then.
Well, I'm trying to give you an example here.
I'm
Alright.
pointing out
Well,
that
in the beginning-
there are two places in the Bible that talk about something being invisible, and one of them
Yes,
is
sir.
talking about God, and the other one you're claiming it's talking about atoms. How do you know it's not talking about God in that verse too?
Because if it says God, it's in the other verses, it describes God as invisible. If he was mentioning God, would he not say God again when he restated the invisible thing? Why would
Wow.
he say God in one sentence being invisible, and then in the second one he's not stating what it is?
So
He didn't say atoms
It's
either.
like saying there's two people, and that one can be entirely different than the other. It's two different. You have two different meanings to what your sentence is saying. but you're just interpreting it as the same thing and an excuse to make me look ignorant toward the fact that what it says. Am I correct?
Well, evidently, I'm ignorant now because I have no clue what you just said.
What I'm saying is that you're giving two different examples of the Bible when it talks about something invisible.
Yes, I am.
And you're trying to like make the assumption that they're talking about the same thing.
No, I'm not, Zach.
I'm saying more than likely it's not.
Zach, I'm not making an assumption that they're talking about the same thing. I'm asking you what your justification is for claiming that they are talking about different things.
Because they describe them entirely different. Like when it talks about God being invisible, it says God. And an excuse to Hebrews,
It's
it doesn't say
1999.
anything. And it never said, if it meant God, it would say God made all things. Not all
How do you
things
know
are
that?
made of God.
How do you know that?
It's kind of common sense when you read the scripture.
It's
you know?
kind of common sense that that's the case. So you're saying that we don't have common sense because we don't agree with you?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you read the scripture and actually look into detail about what it's saying.
You do realize
it
you're
becomes
talking
more
to somebody
clear.
who was a Christian for 25 years, who has studied and taught the scripture for the bulk of his life.
And I'm sorry, you're talking to a former atheist.
Okay, what was your reason for being an atheist?
My reason? Because I was like you. I had no reason to believe. There was no proof.
Okay, so what is your reason to believe now? You found a verse in Hebrews that sounds like it's talking about atoms to you?
Honestly, no, that was not it.
All right, so what's your reason for believing?
My purpose in believing is that as time went on, I started to like look into more stuff. I'd argue with Christians on there, and they start making points, and it made my mind wander because I'm an open-minded person. So I go on there and I finally would do some research myself, and I found every kind of reason to believe.
I didn't ask you for the story. I asked you for what is your reason for believing?
Because I actually found what I was looking for the entire time.
Wow.
I thought that something wasn't there.
You do realize
But
that,
it
like,
was.
for example, if I asked you how your car works and you said because it works, that's not an answer. So when I ask you why you believe and you say because I found what I was looking for, you haven't added anything substantive to the conversation at all, right?
You want me? Okay, if you want me to go into further detail, I will.
I would
What
just
I
like to
mean-
know what the reason is. I mean, you're claiming to have been
Okay.
an atheist, and that's fine because all of that means is that you don't believe. So you went from not believing to believing, and I would like to know what the reason
That's
was.
Okay, well, I went to believing for it was because when I was an atheist, I didn't have any reason to believe, all right? I thought there was no proof. And then when I became a Christian, it's because I had started researching stuff and looking for myself rather than listening to people like Richard Dawkins.
Hey, Zach,
I came to the conclusion that I could
Zach, I don't need the backstory again. Get to the thing that you
just-
researched.
okay.
To get to the thing that you researched to convince you.
What's the research that convinced me?
Yes.
Okay, it'd probably be looking up stuff that's like scientific properties like such as stars, movement of light, that the earth floats, the air has weight, and that mountain and valleys are under the ocean. Those kind of scientific facts were found in the Bible itself. And I don't think people 2,000 years ago could come up with that crazy assumption that would sound ignorant back then, by themselves without spiritual guidance.
So your entire reason for being a believer is an argument from ignorance.
Pardon me?
You're claiming that it's true because it hasn't been proved false. That this is the only answer that you've been. This is the only answer that you can come up with. The only explanation.
No, what I'm stating is that the Bible says what science says now, but it said it 2,000 years before they came up with the assumption of it.
No, it doesn't say that. It doesn't tell me
it
anything at
doesn't?
all about atoms.
Okay, well, when did they find out that mountains and valleys were under the ocean? Scientifically. I ain't talking Bible.
When did they find out that mountains and valleys run to the ocean?
Yeah, and they rose from the ocean and they came from there.
You're talking about tectonic plates? You're talking about the movement of tectonic plates?
Yes, sir. I'm talking about how mountains will rise out of the ocean. When did they discover that fact in science?
Well, it depends. What does the verse say?
I'll turn to it real quick.
Can you give it to me?
Two different verses, so which one you want? I got Jonah 2:6 and 2 Samuel 22:16.
Well, let's start with Jonah 2:6.
Yes, sir. They find it right here. Jonah 3:7.
Because here's the thing.
I bet it's going to be vague. That's why this doesn't impress me too much, Zach, is because people do this with Nostradamus too. You come up with some vague statement, and with the knowledge that you currently have about atoms, you say, hey, this sounds like atoms. But the person who wrote the Bible verse isn't describing atoms. He's not describing protons and electrons and the properties of atoms as we understand it now. He's just saying things unseen.
Yeah, because hindsight's 20/20, and this is just like kind of a post hoc interpretation. Jonah 2:6 says in the NIV, "To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath me barred me forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit." That says nothing about tectonic plate movement.
I didn't say tectonic plates specifically.
It doesn't even say mountains come from the ocean
Yeah.
or whatever.
Okay,
it was.
well, listen, okay? You asked me this question. I'm going to ask you. What is your reason for being an atheist?
Because I have no reason to believe that a God exists, and every time I interact with people who claim that they do, they are utter failures at defending what they believe, pointing to verses that they're going to interpret based on information afterwards.
May I give you my personal opinion on why that is?
Oh, please.
Okay, well, don't cut me off here, because I'm going to get to the point real quick.
It needs to be quick, because there are other callers, but go ahead.
I will. Well, my point is, maybe it's because you have a show that's called The Atheist Experience, and you determine what points are valid and what is not valid, which doesn't seem kind of fair in a debate, considering that you have your view, we have ours. Maybe it's that you don't give enough time, and if they even try to hint at something, I mean, we don't have to be experts to understand stuff that we believe in ourselves. And maybe your interpretations you're giving, calling us ignorant and stuff like that, isn't because we actually are. Maybe it's because you're just dictating a whole show to pretty much bash hate and criticism, and as you guys put it on Facebook, let me get my ass handed to me on Facebook, and you're pretty much doing that to defend what? Something you don't even believe in. You just made a whole entire show to go against religion. Why, if you do not believe it?
Why do we do this?
Go out and make your own interpretation
Zach?
of whether they believe in God or not.
Zach, first of all, you already agreed that when I referred to you as ignorant, that it was an accurate assessment. There wasn't any...
Because you wasn't calling me a name ignorant, you're saying I was not. How you say...
Zach, would you stop being butthurt and let me finish, please?
Butthurt.
Yeah, you're butthurt. Get over it.
Butthurt.
Yes. See,
Okay, well,
you asked why we do this. I don't do this show in order to run around and keep saying, hey, I don't believe, hey, I don't believe. The truth of the matter is that people believe a lot of different things, and some of the things they believe have an impact on their actions, which affects other people. And as long as religious individuals are going to be attempting to legislate the world based on their views in ways that affect all of us, then it's worthwhile to stand in opposition to it. Meanwhile, I would prefer to live in a world where people make decisions for rational reasons as much as possible, and not just saying this verse looks like this to me, therefore I'm going to give up. Okay. Are you putting me on hold, Zach?
Hey, can you listen for 1 second?
One Mississippi, go.
Okay, listen. Could you look up a verse from me? You ain't got to do it on the show. Just look it up for me. Jeremiah 33:22, where it talks about the stars being in a multitude and they can't be numbered, and they're various different types. I just want you to simply research that yourself.
You don't think that ancient people would have noticed there was a multitude of stars in the sky?
No, because back if you look in the, what'd you call them, Nostradamus' days? They believe there's hundreds. He only believed...
No. Zach, please. I know that you've been backed into a corner, but please don't just make shit up. Because Zach, in the olden days, when there wasn't electric light, you could see billions of stars. Nobody thought that there was about 100. Nobody thought that there was about 100.
Cosmos?
What?
Have you watched the show Cosmos?
Yes, I watched the original. I'm watching the other one. I can't wait.
That's where I got the information from.
Cosmos told you that people thought there were a couple hundred stars?
And he said Nostradamus thought there was 1,000. And he came up with the relative idea that the Earth revolved around the sun. No, I'm sorry, that's a whole different guy, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Bad interpretation. Okay, but it was talking about how he came up with the idea that it was a wide space instead of just a little tiny area. It talked about how they thought there was only the stars they could see.
You do realize, Zach, that these were biblical ideas, that there was a firmament with only the stars that you could see, and that the earth was flat, and that there was a tree from which you could see the entire earth, that this is all in the Bible?
Did you say the Bible says the earth is flat?
Yes.
It does not.
It does.
In Isaiah, it says it's a circle.
Do you realize that circles are flat, Zach?
Do you realize that the word sphere wasn't even invented back in biblical times, let alone it was considered the same shape as a circle?
Yeah, do you realize that the fact that there wasn't a word means they probably didn't have the concept down pat? See,
So
here's
how
the
would they
thing.
say circle?
Here's the thing. The verses say that there's a tree from which you can see the entire
Oh,
earth.
I know exactly
Is
what
that
you're quoting.
is
You're
that
quoting out of Daniel, you're not.
Zach? Is that possible?
No, I'm saying is you're quoting out Daniel.
Zach, is it possible that there is a tree from which you can see the entire earth?
No, sir. That's what
Then
I'm
the
trying to say,
Bible
but
is
reason
wrong.
why it says that is.
Then the Bible is wrong.
Okay, listen. You're quoting from Daniel, correct?
Yes.
Okay, if you look into it and actually get interpretation, it's talking about a vision he had, not a literal thing he saw. So
Why would he have a vision of something that's impossible and then record it?
I'm sorry, have you never had a dream of something that's impossible?
I have a dream that this call will end someday, and I'm not sure it's possible.
Oh, it's fine. You can go ahead and be an ass if you like.
I'm sorry, Zach, but when we asked why you believed, what was your reason? Your reason was Jonah 2:6 talking about the mountains, which doesn't say anything.
Jonah 2:6. That was not my only reason for believing that.
That's the one you told me to look up, and it doesn't say
That's the one I told
anything.
you to look up as an example about-
Zach, it doesn't say anything close to what you say it says.
That actually wasn't my interpretation. I actually got that from the Scholar website.
Okay, I no longer care about interpretations, yours or otherwise. Come up with evidence. I'm done. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
I think the Bible means this. Great. Can you demonstrate it? Well, can you prove that it means something else? I'm not the one claiming it. But
Yeah, it's vague statements, and I think you have a predisposition to want to believe that it's talking about something that science later found. But if you actually examine it, it doesn't really talk about it in enough detail for you to legitimately say that's atoms or that's plate tectonics. You're taking that and overlaying your modern concepts with what the verses say.
yeah, if it was actually revealing information, then the verse itself would instruct us in such a way that we could at least begin to explore it. But that's not what happens. What happens is science makes discoveries about the world, and sometimes they seem to conflict with what the Bible has to say about a global flood and all this other stuff. And then after that, people go back and reinterpret what the Bible says so that it becomes more consistent with science.
Yeah. And then you're cherry picking as well. You're saying, well, these two verses sort of sound like something in modern science, but this other thing was just it was a dream that we don't need to pay attention to.
Yeah, ignoring all kinds of things, like the fact that the order of events in Genesis is wrong, or that man was formed from dust and stuff like that. It's probably true. Zach could have been an atheist, and he might have been convinced for those reasons. And that's one of the reasons why we do the show, is because I'd like for people to be convinced of things for good reasons and not, hey, this verse here kind of looks like it says something. And the only way that could happen is if God revealed it to them. How did you reach that conclusion? Not only did you reach the conclusion that the best explanation is that God did it, but you're convinced that there's no other explanation. I don't know. Jacob in Cleveland, thanks for waiting.
Hey. Wow, that was really frustrating.
Yeah. And I'm
Okay.
high.
What?
Nothing, go ahead.
I could imagine that if you'd read the Quran first and it had revealing scripture, you might be a Muslim right now, potentially.
Yeah, Muslims make the same claim about the Quran that
Right.
has scientific discoveries as well.
Yeah, even more. They make even more claims along those lines.
Yeah.
But anyway, what do you got for us, Jacob?
Yeah, I know we had correspondence over email a little while back, but I figured this topic might be worth discussing for the general population, people who view the show. I was curious about what peer-reviewed journals exist that give like empirical evidence, not necessarily for atheism, but for secular or non-religious topics.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Peer-reviewed journals you're going to find predominantly secular positions. I don't know of any religious peer-reviewed journals. And there would be a question as to their veracity and how good the peers are who are doing the reviewing.
Yeah, I think Answers in Genesis claims to have peer-reviewed stuff. But
Yeah, when they couldn't get their stuff into actual respectable journals, they went out and created their own peer-reviewed journal.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say by default, a scientific peer-reviewed journal is atheist if it doesn't invoke God to explain whatever it is it's studying.
But if you're talking about whether or not there are journals that address like philosophical questions, like does God exist or whatever, there are philosophy journals. They're not science journals.
I guess my question is, and I had an example that I wanted to talk about, and it's like the example of perhaps the relationship between those people who are suggestible or potentially good hypnotic subjects and those who are highly religious. I'm curious if there's a connection between the two, and that can be empirically observed, and that's a topic that has direct relation to religion, potentially non-religious persons, and just society at large.
Yeah. Sounds like a study you could try out. I mean, of course, hypnosis is pretty much just play acting between two people, but
I've heard that, though. I've heard there's been a connection between suggestibility and religious fervor.
I know there's a connection between gullibility and religiosity because I was
Do you
there.
have an article that could reference for that?
Oh no! That was me being glib, because I was gullible for a number of years.
Fair enough.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
I wasn't sure we were actually done. Joey in L.A., thanks for calling.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm fine. I'm actually calling because well, first I'd like to say that was an awesome debate you did with Cy. It was great.
Oh, thanks. I think it was okay, but I'll take a great.
I happen to. I was asking about presuppositional apologetics myself. I actually happen to. I by no means do I think you actually need any advice on how to handle presuppositional apologetics, but I was just thinking I'd call in because I happen to have one way that I happen to go about like debating these guys, and it seemed to be really effective for me. And I'm not aware of that anybody's actually ever done it this way. If there is, I suppose, and maybe you could inform me of it. But I've heard in the debate that you also on the show that the presuppositional apologetics are pretty much in essence like another form of the transcendental argument.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I've heard that just another version or a way of shifting the burden of proof, or it could be shifting. It's also circular reasoning, and I can see. I could understand why anybody would say those. I think those are all pretty much true, but I wanted to bring this one up to you. For me, I happen to think that presuppositional apologetics really are just another way of defining God into existence. Would you agree with that?
Sure. I mean, that's kind of the case with anything that kind of deals with ontology, whether it's the ontological argument or not. Because one of the things that, like on the rare occasion that Cy got to an answer for, like, why are the logical absolutes true, he would say things like, because they are consistent with the mind of God, or that for reasons which are sufficient to God. And the whole thing is that he's, not he, because he borrowed this from Van Til and others, the precepts have said, hey, here's this problem in philosophy, and we can solve it by appealing to an entity which has the characteristics necessary to solve it.
Yeah,
it's the exact same thing.
That way.
Yeah.
So usually when the presuppositional apologists that I've come into online, I usually try to essentially what I bring up is that the one way that as I agree with what you said. I try to bring it to them this way, that in essence what you're doing with presuppositional apologetics is that you're taking something that we know exists, such as reasoning, and we attribute its origin to something that you're trying to propose exists, such as God. And so what I try to do is sometimes give an example. I use this one, that the Hindu god for language is Vak. And so the thing that Sai will do is that essentially he will go, Sai would say something like along the lines of, well, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And so I could similarly say something that, well, knowledge, language can't come about through, that Vak is the origins of language. And you can't, in an atheistic world, you can't account for language because you have to borrow from my worldview. And no matter what the opposition would say, it doesn't matter what sort of argument they can come up with. I can always say, you can't. How can you say that? You have to borrow from my worldview. You're using words. I can account for that because I believe in Bach.
Okay.
And so I think that one of probably the best questions to ask. Well, similarly, I know that Sai would, if you were to press Sai, like, how do you know God's real? How do you know God's real? If somebody were to ask me, how do you know Bach is real? It's like, well, if Bach wasn't real, then you couldn't have made sense of what you just said because you just use words. You have to borrow from my worldview. And so the questions I would ask them is, how do you know that God is the origins of reasoning? How do you know that reasoning came from God? And some of them would...
Because God has revealed it to them in such a way that they can be certain.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to go there. And so if when they present that to me, then I usually say, how do you know God is actually, in fact, telling the truth? Or
because God cannot lie.
Yes, exactly. And then I ask them, how do you know that? They go to the scriptures, of course, because Scripture says that God doesn't lie. And I would say, how would you be able to distinguish between a lying God from one who tells the truth? Because a lying God, the only thing he could possibly say about himself in Scriptures was that he tells the truth. And
Yeah,
so
a lying God would say he never tells a lie as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Well, yeah, and I've addressed that in the past too. You know, for example, if we're limited beings and you've got one good being and one evil being, how do you know which one's which? You've had to rely on your own. Well, God put his moral code in his heart. Well, that doesn't mean that he's good. It just means he's consistent with the moral code that he put in his heart, in your heart. I mean, so that's the secret behind that I tried to expose a little bit behind the precepts is that they're claiming that no other worldview can account for reason. And they don't ever demonstrate that no other worldview can account for reason. They also don't demonstrate that their worldview can. They just claim it. It's been, it reminds me of an opening to one of Dawkins' lectures where how people would be laughed out of academia for talking about the destruction of the dinosaurs if they started things with like, it has been privately revealed to me that the extinction of the dinosaurs is because blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I suppose the last thing I would like to say is I hear a lot of people, including I think it was David Smalley, maybe on the post-debate sort of thing. I think a lot of people are granting Sai too much credit when Sai asks, is it possible that God could reveal himself in such a way that you could be absolutely certain? I actually would say no.
Yeah, that's what I said during the debate.
Yeah, because the thing is, a lie, something that's a fact that would be divinely inspired from God would be indistinguishable from a lie that's divinely inspired from God, because you would believe them to the same extent.
Yeah, I don't think they can get any further, as I kind of mentioned in the debate, I don't think he can get any further than saying that he has an authority that he really, really trusts. But I don't see how this authority could ever make him actually absolutely certain, because the example that I used was trying to pour clean water through a dirty filter. It's still going to come out dirty. And so it doesn't matter how pure the water is, or it doesn't matter how accurate the information is from God. You're not actually achieving absolute certainty. You are just really, really confident that this person is telling you the truth, and that's as close as they can get.
Yeah.
And that's true whether their God exists or not, because I could appeal to any fictional character and say that this fictional character has relayed truthful information, blah blah blah.
Yeah. And so essentially, I really think they're just talking about, or when he says knowledge, he's really just saying how much he absolutely believes in something, not actually knowledge.
It's hyperbole, essentially. I really, 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 really believe. There's no possibility I could be wrong. Well, congratulations. You've just now set yourself up as unreasonable. And that was the whole point of trying to have a debate. But
okay. Well, thank you so much for the time. I thought you did amazing. I know you think you did okay, but I honestly think there's no reason anybody should ever have to talk to Sai again.
Well, that much I agree with. But anyway,
right,
thanks, Joey.
Thanks, Joey.
So we got like 3 minutes left. I guess we'll just go right down the line to Robert in Shreveport. We got like 3 minutes left.
Hey, Matt, what's the best argument you've ever heard from anybody for the existence of God?
I've never heard a good one.
I've heard
Well, I mean,
I've heard some that do a better job of obfuscating the problems, like the modologic version of the ontological argument, and the only reason that it's well, I can't really say it's better. The problem is that almost nobody actually understands it.
Well, I don't understand what you said right there in the first place. But so, I mean, you must have heard. Could you give me a simple example of the best thing you've ever heard for the argument for God?
It's like asking me for the best disease to come across.
There you go.
to be infected with. I guess a mild rash or a scrape, which don't count as diseases, but I think the one that appeals to people the most is some version of the arguments appealing to morality, because we'd love to have this sense of justice, that people are actually going to get what they deserve. Unfortunately, the arguments don't get anywhere near that.
Okay. Well, I'm an agnostic theist, so I have no argument for the existence of God. And I was following along. Even if God showed up today in front of you or me, I suppose neither one of us would believe him. We'd probably think that he was an alien or something.
Yeah, except that you just said you're a theist, so.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah. I couldn't prove that it was him, but yeah, I'm agnostic. I don't have any secret proof.
No. It's not. It's not about proof. You're claiming to believe something. Why?
Theist.
Why do you believe that?
It's just a personal thing. I guess. Why do you choose? Do you have secret proof that you're an atheist? That's correct. Or are you an agnostic atheist?
I'm probably agnostic atheist based on what you're saying, because there's no burden of proof. The burden of proof is on the claim that there is a God, and when you try to point this out as just like personal preference, to me that sounds like you don't care what the truth is. You're just going to believe this because it feels good to believe it.
Well, that's life. Yeah, you can choose.
That's not life. That's sad. You don't choose your beliefs, by the way. You can choose what you say about your beliefs, but you don't choose your beliefs. It's not like I can choose to believe that I can fly or something. You're either convinced of something or you're not. And so I guess the better question is, do you actually believe there is a God, or do you believe that there's some value in saying that you believe that there's a God?
I believe there's a God, yeah.
And you have no reason or argument for it?
No.
Why would you believe anything that you don't have an argument for? I have to let you go. They're cutting us off. They're putting up the credits. Okay. But thanks for calling.
Thanks, Matt.
That's it for this week.
I wish we had a little bit more time with Robert.
Yeah.
I think if most theists were honest, they would all be agnostic theists, and not like Cy, who I think is really agnostic, but he doesn't want to admit it.
Anyway, that's it for this week. Thanks to everybody whose name was just up on the screen for making the show, and the studio audience, and we'll see you at El Arroyo maybe.
Bye, folks.
Shouldn't do the show high anymore.
You want to take some calls in the after show?
No, I'm wiped. You can take them if you want.
Oh, wow.
Christ in Sacramento.
Well, we got a call from Christ.
Christ, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, but the show's over, so why are we getting a call from Christ?
Well, you're getting a call from Christ because Christ has a hard time being Christ and needs to explain some things because you guys probably have more of an open mind than most people do. And I try to talk to Christians, they want to pray the devil out of me. I don't have a devil in me.
Okay.
Let me tell you about my name, first of all, and I understand it puts a rift in the universe. It puts a rift in all kinds of things. It makes people real uncomfortable, especially Christians. I was born Christopher by my mother. She called me Sunshine. And when I got into computers, I started going by Chris, but that wasn't gender specific, and I would get people going M/F ? Wondering whether I was male or female. I was surprising that I didn't get any weird pictures. Anyway, and when I went by Christopher on the computer, it would cut off the ER or the R, so it would become out Christophe. So I started going by Christ, and that fixed both of those problems, but it created another one. So I went researching why that did that. Well, I've been going on by Christ on the computer since the IBM PC Junior. Are you here there still?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So one day my brother, when I was 20, about in my 20s, early 20s, my brother came out of prison, my younger brother, and he had a bunch of tattoos on, and he asked me if I wanted to get a tattoo, and I said, well, I don't have the money for a tattoo. He said, well, I'll pay for it. I said, okay. So we go to the tattoo parlor, right, and I tell the guy in the tattoo guy, so you can put a scorpion, because I'm born November 5th, put a scorpion and put the name Christ underneath it, because I've been researching the name, right? My brother's in the other chair. He says, oh, no, you want Chris. He's trying to do the Jedi mind trick on me. I said, no. I tell the guy, no, put Christ underneath there. My brother says, no. He says, put Chris. Well, my brother's paying for the tattoo. I'm not going to beat his ass in the middle of the tattoo parlor. So I said, okay.
Of course.
So he put Chris underneath there. So a couple of days later, we're over at one of my brother's friend's house drinking. I'm drinking, he's drinking Bacardi 151. I've been sober 32 years, but this was way back then. And I was drinking, and the dude had a tattoo gun. I said, can I borrow that for a minute? He said, sure. He loads it up with some black ink, and I took my tattoo gun. You can see where the difference is, went from Chris to Christ, because I put a T on the end of the Chris. And I looked at my brother, and I said, now what, mother and thing, you know? And he was too, so blacked out drunk. So I fought for the name. It's my name. My name is Christ. I fought my own blood for it. And that's the reason why. I've researched the name. I see what it does to the universe. I watch what it does to Christians. And I find out that a lot of people in Native American, the Black heritage, a lot of different old religious cultures understand that Jesus was not Christ and Christ is not Jesus. And that there was actually a Jesus, and I don't know, there's a whole lot of disinformation about that. I don't even want to go into that. That's a whole controversial subject in itself. But I am Christ. I do want to exist. I have a real difficult time with people out here in the real world because they just don't want me being Christ. When they go, oh, there's only one Christ and you're not him. I say, well, excuse me. I want to exist on your planet. It isn't your planet. You can't tell me I can or can't exist here. And you know what? This planet belongs to herself. Mother Earth, she's a living entity. She keeps us alive. Anyway, I just wanted to explain that to you. That's why the name, and because of that name, and because of my connections, and because of what happened when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon and created a conduit and broke a barrier that created the World Wide Web into a universal communication platform, you see, that changed everything. And that was when I was put to sleep. I was put on psych meds at 17, 18 years old. When Neil Armstrong went to the moon, I started talking to people about extraterrestrial life and the end of civilization on Earth and me being Christ. Yeah, I knew way back then. And they decided they didn't want to hear that. So I was put to sleep for 37 years. Well, I put in psychotropic medication at stasis for 37 years. My father was a Navy SEAL on the USS Essex in 1952.
Hey, Christ.
When Neil Armstrong was a test pilot. Anyway, okay, so I'm done for a minute.
Yeah, we got to go. They're tearing the studio down.
Yeah. Listen, I tried to call in. I'll try calling on this number next week. Would that be okay?
Well, what did you want to talk about?
Well, I don't know. What is there to talk about? Can we talk about the end of days on Earth? Because that's what we're facing. Did you know we're in a binary star system, right?
Yeah, actually, we're not.
Well, yes, we are. There's another star system out there, and the Vatican has a telescope on the south. They call it, there's an acronym for it, and they're looking at a brown dwarf out there about 4 times the size of Jupiter coming through here. All right.
Then I think
know. There's a lot of disinformation out there.
I think it's probably better if we don't actually talk about that.
Well, what do you want to talk about?
Honestly, at this point, I have no idea. But thanks for calling.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Matt, I really appreciate your stuff on YouTube.
Cool. Thanks. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Later.
Thank you.
Christ.